Open Tobias Harris, and Tobias drills it! Sixers up one!
Embiid fakes, Embiid down the lane!
The NBA draft continues to inch closer, and today's video I want to talk about one of the players that I think will have a growing following and fan base throughout likely his NBA career and certainly in this NBA draft, that being Bub Carrington from the University of Pitt. He's got a really fun game, certainly one of those bucket and a problem type players. He is the definition of a hooper for sure. So I do want to dive into what specifically I think will translate to the NBA level, why I think he's a guy that I like more than I have full belief in, and a little bit of other stuff about his game. So let's kick things off by taking a look at his stats here, what he did bring to the table from a production standpoint. Just 1 year at Pitt, of course, a one and done year where he's played 33.2 minutes per game, averaged 13.8 points, 4.1 assists, 5.2 rebounds, shot the ball just 41.2% from the field on 11.7 field goal attempts per game, and just 32.2% from three on 6.1 3-point attempts. Pretty good in the turnover department, just 1.09, a little over a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio there. Not incredibly effective defensively, just 0.6 steals, 0.2 blocks per game there. He does measure in at just under 6'4" without shoes in. Decent size there, weighs 195 pounds, a 6'8" wingspan. It does feel like there's a little bit more defensive potential than he's shown, at least, but certainly not a lot from the production standpoint on that side of the floor. I also think in general, he could help himself from an efficiency standpoint in a major way by just cutting down his shot selection a little bit. Some of that was obviously him creating his own buckets at Pitt, that on the season as a whole, 75% of his made shots were unassisted. That's a huge number there. I get that he is a primary ball handler, and to some extent, that's always going to be the case, but it was to an extreme that I think needs to be reined in a little bit at the next level. I do think he's a player where the fit and the team that he's on and the way that he's allowed to play will impact what his NBA role and outlook truly will be. But let's take a look at some of his plays here, a little bit of highlights and what he brings to the table. So he's got a really silky smooth game here. That's the number one word that jumps out to me when I watch him play, is it is smooth. Now, scoring is probably always going to be his calling card as a player, that he is a guy that is a create his own shot, a shoot first player, a guy that can create off the dribble. The jumper looks smooth again, and you can see a little bit what I'm saying with the shot selection here. This play obviously goes in, but this is like I would be screaming from the bench as a head coach with 27 on the shot clock that he's shooting a fadeaway corner jumper. Just not exactly what you want there, but of course it goes in. There's a lot of that he's a big fan of, kind of settling for tough twos. There's a bit of a step back three there. You see the smoothness and the separation. I do buy him as a shooter more than the numbers indicate. I know 32.2% from three is not great. The volume pretty impressive there on 6.1 per game. A couple other stats that kind of jumped out to me. Well, for starters, he feels a little bigger than he is. He had just 1.9 turnovers. The decision making is probably the biggest thing, the 2.12 assist to turnover ratio. Despite the shot selection as a playmaker, I think he does make really good decisions, and that's kind of what changed my opinion a little bit on Bub, is that like starting out I kind of believed the case, and I do love this from here. You see the little bit of trash talk leading into it. You see the fire in him. He plays with a fire for sure. So cool little step back, gets the foul, and wants to let the defender know. And shout out to his teammates for calming things down there. But I do love that there is a bit of a chip on his shoulder for him. I think when projecting a role for Bub Carrington, that the number one thing that I think I would lean on is I think the best way to use him is likely as kind of an off-the-bench scorer, potential six-man type player. He is capable of catching fire and changing a game with his offensive production from a scoring standpoint. That, again, I believe in the shot more than the numbers indicate. And here's a deep three by Bub that all the confidence in the world. He does feel himself as a shooter, that he certainly believes in himself too. And look at that, full out Dame range, full out Steph Curry range, that he's loving it there. I also like his decisions in transition, not particularly that one as a shot, but he does get the and one three-pointer there. But in general, when he does create the advantage where he's getting the 4-on-3s, 3-on-2s, those type of opportunities in transition, he does a nice job of making the right decision as a passer. I do think he could be reined in as a score first guy, but look at the way that he does get up in transition, push the floor. And again, I'm not a massive fan of that shot, but in this situation, of course, they're beating Jacksonville by 30. This is something where I think he was chasing points a little bit, not something that I'm super reading into from a prospect standpoint or how it translates to the NBA level. It's interesting to me. The defense is probably the biggest concern. That, like, when kind of projecting what he can be, that's probably the biggest swing skill to me. That I think if he can find a way to hold up as a defender at the NBA level, then he is a potential starting caliber point guard or a combo guard in a game. He's probably always going to be a little bit more of that combo guard type archetype of player. Although, once again, like, the playmaking is really what changed my opinion. That I kind of entered this draft process being a little bit out on Bub Carrington. Again, I like his game. He's a guy I like as a player more so than I necessarily believe in him. But the playmaking is what changed things. And I'm going to highlight this play right here. That you can see in general, his pick and roll reads are really high level stuff. And you see a little bit of, looks like semi ghost screen here that he just kind of slips it. Good pass over the top and finishes around the rim there. That's not the easiest play here. We're going to freeze this at the exact point where there is the advantage here. And you can see the defender, they're playing a little bit of drop, kind of. The defender doesn't commit in either direction here. This is certainly on the big man for not defending this quite right, as well as the man around the screen really gets lost here. We're going to even walk this back one more time. I don't like the angle by either one of these defenders, to be perfectly honest. You can see he has to take the super wide angle, completely out of position, puts his man in a bad spot, and he kind of does the bad read here too. So they both kind of misplayed this a little bit, created the easy lay-in, but that's a testament to Bub for punishing them. And that's what a good guard is about, that you have to make those types of decisions. Nice find for the lob there. I do believe in him as a playmaker, and that's what has kind of reopened my eyes to Bub Carrington, a guy that I did at one point kind of view as a fringe NBA type prospect. I do believe because of those reads as a passer is going to find a way to stick. When kind of thinking about a player comp for Carrington and what he could be, Terry Rozier was a common name that kind of popped to my mind. And Scary Terry obviously has made his way around the league for a couple years now. He has had his highs and lows. It was disappointing he was injured for this year's playoffs, although not from the Sixers perspective, who, of course, is to play the Heat in that play in there. And a nice little dunk by Carrington here. You can see the size and the athleticism. He's not a plus athlete in general from like the verticality standpoint. Smooth is once again the word I would use when kind of describing his mannerisms of the court, the way that he moves. That's a clear example of what I kind of see of him as an athlete. Look at the smoothness to kind of evade his way through the air there. He's not going to explode or jump out the gym, but he's certainly not a zero from the athlete standpoint. I don't think he's going to shine in comparison to some of the high-level NBA players who, of course, are the elite of the elite in that category, but a guy that will hold his own. And I know I was touching on the defensive side of things. It's weird to me that, like, how little resistance he applied at some point. Like, sure, he's a little bit skinny, that he is just 6'4", 195, and you're seeing a bit of the passion from him there. I see way more of that on the offensive end, where he's fired up to let somebody know he's got a bucket, not as fired up or taking it personally when he is on the defensive end. A nice little bounce pass there. And probably the biggest thing that concerned me defensively is I saw him get overpowered a lot. There was a lot of opportunities where guards that really should not have any business being capable of doing this to him were able to put their shoulder down and get to their spots in a way that he simply should be capable of at least providing a better effort against. That you got to be able at least to hang defensively. And obviously at the college level, we've seen both examples of this, of players who just weren't quite as locked in. And Bub obviously had a pretty significant scoring load that he was carrying on the offensive end. So that does wear you down and tire you. Some guys are able to flip that switch and adapt at the NBA level. There's some guys that it's not. For Bub, to be perfectly honest, I lean toward there being some legitimate defensive concerns. He also was not a great finisher at the rim this year. That he's and that's a large reason why the shooting percentage are as poor as they are. Once again, shooting 41.2% from the field on 11.7 field goal attempts and 32.2% from three on 6.1 3-point attempts. I think a lot of that is shot selection. That I think if you clean up the shot diet, that those efficiency splits will leap by a pretty significant margin. But the finishing around the rim is a legitimate concern and something that he's going to have to address because to an extent, he's a little one-dimensional as a player, that he's only a perimeter-oriented scorer. And there's probably one of his better examples as a driver here. You see him get downhill, coming off the screen here, a little pump fake, attacks the closeout, and finishes over the taller defender. If he did that more regularly, I would feel a lot more confident about that projecting. It did feel like a lot of times, and this goes back to the athleticism conversation, he's not going to get there not going to get up there and dunk it. He's not going to get up there and finish off the glass in this advanced ways. It's much more of a smoothness, and there is the pick and roll reads. Once again, this is probably the biggest thing that keeps me intrigued, why he could be a high-level player at the NBA level, at least a guy that can contribute. That's a great read. He leads his roller perfectly here, sets the screen, got the advantage, nice bounce pass, and creates the dunk. That's great point guard play. That's exactly what you want in that situation. Good job by the big man to finish. But as a whole, like, it's interesting that when I think about what his NBA skill will be, which again, I'm pretty high on when projecting prospects, that I really like guys that I know this is going to be their defining trait as the NBA level. And then we can kind of build things off that, whether that is as a defender, a playmaker, a scorer. For Bub, I still think it is a scorer, that's going to be his number one option, but it is that playmaking potential or that possibility that he could kind of grow his way into a true point guard that does keep me intrigued. And here's another example that I like here. He does this a lot. Like, while I'm critiquing his ability to finish at around the rim, a lot of times he gets himself into deep rim position, which he takes away the entirety of his shot here, but he finds these bailout passes often, and he finds his guy in the corner, knocks down the three there. That's a great pass. He's a bit too reliant on that for my liking. That in general, he kind of drives with the intent of kicking out rather than the intent to score, which, like, points are points, and as long as the results are the results, it's fine. But it does feel like his mind can be made up to an extent, which I don't fully love. That's a pretty tough pass there. We're gonna watch that one more time. This is one of his more advanced looks. There's basically zero of an angle. Bang, that's really impressive. So good pass there, and our guy from NC State. But for Bub specifically, I do think he will find his lane in the NBA level. I think there's a little bit too much creation, too much talent, and his ability overall is really intriguing. But he isn't a guy that I'm pumping the stock and say, you must draft this. I think more likely than not, he's probably going to be a guy who hears his name called in the 20s. And I think that's about right for this year's draft, even with there being it perceived as such a weaker class. He's this kind of mix of, like, a lot of the appeal of the players in this draft are these win now pieces, these guys that I believe can step into immediate roles and fill on teams. I don't quite think that's Bub Carrington. That I think he's going to need to be a guy that's capable of playing through his mistakes, has the opportunity to be that microwave scorer off the bench, run his own offense. I don't see him as a guy that fits into the flow of things immediately. I think he's going to have some growing pains more so than a lot of these guys, and that's a great, like, part of the appeal to this year's draft class is there's so many plug and play guys. I think Bub's a little bit one of the more unpolished gems in this year's class. So that does scare me from that standpoint there. And another thing to note, he does seem to be incredibly ball dominant, and I don't think that's going to change. Since high school, he struggled on catch and shoot opportunities. It is weird to me that, like, we've seen this with a lot of different shooters, and in theory, it's the same shot. I think a part of it for him is he's got a really nice motion into his pull-up game, that there is a smoothness the way that he is able to get to his spots there. Does not feel the same. It's a little more regimented on the catch and shoot, and that is something that he's going to have to address. Now, I do think that definitely can be fixed. We see just about everyone get better as a shooter at the NBA level just by putting the reps in, being around basketball as much as they are. So for Bub, I still think that translates, but it's certainly limiting to his ceiling if he's not capable of being a catch and shooter, or he has to have the ball in his hands. That if he's going to be as ball dominant as he's currently playing, there aren't as many opportunities for him on the NBA wide scale. So need to find a way to improve those complementary skills, playing like more of a combo guard. I think he should embrace that role. But I don't think he's ever going to be good enough to be a true point guard. I don't think he's ever going to be good enough to be quite the ideal shooting guard or a guy who's always a create first guy. But I do think that combo guard type archetype is what he should kind of lean into a little more than he has. Again, the playmaking skills and the potential in that area is what keeps me intrigued for Bub. But I do think that he's a bit more of a project player than a lot of players in this draft. And for that reason, I think a bit lower on my draft board than probably the consensus there. That he's a good player, he's talented, I'm intrigued by him, but there's a significant number of guys that I'm just more confident in what their NBA role is. And that's really what I'm looking at this draft class as a part of, is there's so many of these niche role players, these guys that could be impact win now pieces. It may not be the home run swings, and Bub could be looked at as more of a player in that category. But for my eyes, I need to see a little more before I'm truly believing in making that gamble versus all these guys that I do feel are sure things. So let me know what you guys think of that breakdown there. If you disagree with me, if you do think Bub is a slam dunk in a way that I don't quite see it to this point, again, I will be rooting for the guy. He is a fun player to watch, and I definitely think he will have his fans. But I just have a bit too many questions for how things translate to the NBA level to be risking a lottery pick or something like that. So with a late first round swing, I do think a team could be rewarded with what he turns out to be. But I do think the situation needs to be just right for his developmental arc to continue and just grow in the direction that he needs as a player. So we'll see if that ultimately comes together, and definitely will be rooting for that to be the case. So my player comp, I will throw Terry Rozier out there as probably my number one there. It's not perfect, but it is a guy that I could see him following a similar archetype or pathway through the pros like that. So we'll see how everything happens there. Appreciate you guys for tuning into this video. Make sure you are dropping a like, dropping your comments below to let me know your thoughts on Bub, as well as subscribing to the channel if you have not already. We'll have a ton more draft content coming out until that final day where these guys will all find out what teams they will be on for the foreseeable future. So keep it locked and posted for all that, and talk to you next time right here on Pick Swap.